my golden child sister just lost custody of her 2 kids and forfeited a $2 million inheritance because the DNA kit she gave my daughter to destroy my marriage ended up exposing her own decade-long affair instead. Let me say that again. Paige spent her entire life being the family favorite who could do no wrong, while I was the scapegoat who got blamed for everything. And now she's sobbing in family court as the judge strips away her children and her trust fund. The worst part, she did this to herself. Last Christmas, she was so convinced my wife Kate was cheating that she gave my 12-year-old daughter Melanie a DNA kit as a fun family project. Her real plan was to prove Kate's infidelity in front of the whole family during the holidays and watch my marriage explode. She wanted to destroy the one good thing in my life because she couldn't stand that the family disappointment had found happiness. But here's where it gets beautiful. 3 months later, her 16-year-old son, Scott, decided to do his own DNA test for a school genetics project. The results didn't prove Kate was unfaithful. They proved that Scott wasn't even her husband Sean's biological child. 10 years of playing the perfect wife and mother, 10 years of posting happy family photos on social media, all destroyed because her own son used the same weapon she'd tried to use against me. Now, I'm sitting in this courtroom with folders full of evidence. Credit card statements showing hotel charges, text messages, planning secret meetups, DNA results that shattered her perfect family lie. The family trust our grandparents set up has a morality clause that just cost her everything. The same trust she always assumed would be hers because she was their precious golden child. She's about to learn that karma doesn't care about birth order, and sometimes the family scapegoat gets the last laugh because while she was busy trying to destroy my life, I was quietly building the evidence that would end hers. All because she gave my daughter a DNA kit for Christmas. Growing up in our house was like living in 2 different realities. Paige could break a lamp, and somehow it would be my fault for making her nervous. I could get straight A's, and my parents would find something to criticize about my study habits. When she crashed Dad's car at 17, they bought her a new one and grounded me for setting a bad example by walking home from school instead of getting rides. The pattern was always the same. Paige would mess up, cry, and suddenly everyone would rally around her to fix whatever problem she'd created. I would succeed at something, and the conversation would shift to how I needed to be more humble or supportive of my sister's feelings. By the time we were teenagers, the roles were set in stone. Paige learned she could do no wrong, and I could do no right. The family dynamics might have stayed that way forever if it weren't for our grandparents' estate planning. When I was 25, Grandpa Walter called me into his study to explain the family trust they'd established. $2 million split equally between Paige and me when they passed away with one very specific condition. "The money comes with expectations," Grandpa said, sliding the trust documents across his desk. "Your grandmother and I built this wealth through hard work and moral living. Anyone who receives these funds must demonstrate the same values." I read through the morality clause carefully. Adultery, fraud, criminal behavior, or any action that brought shame to the family name would result in immediate forfeiture of inheritance rights. The money would go to charity instead. "We've seen too many families destroyed by money, given to people who hadn't earned it," Grandma added from her chair by the window. "Character matters more than blood relation." The trust had one condition: moral behavior required. Paige never bothered to read those documents. She just assumed the money would be hers because she'd always been the golden child who got everything handed to her. She married Sean right out of college, had 2 beautiful kids, and built what looked like the perfect family life. Her social media was a masterpiece of curated happiness. Beach vacations, family game nights, romantic date nights with Sean. She had a gift for making everything look effortless and ideal. Our parents would show her posts to their friends, beaming with pride about their successful daughter, who'd figured out how to balance it all. What none of us knew was that Paige had been living a double life for years. While she was posting anniversary dinner photos with Sean, she was texting another man about their next hotel meetup. While she was sharing family vacation pictures, she was planning weekend getaways with her affair partner. She had learned to manipulate everyone so well that no one questioned the perfect image she presented. Not Sean, not our parents, not me. We all believed what she wanted us to believe. She was everyone's favorite, until the DNA tests came. Last Christmas morning started like every other family gathering at my parents' house. Wrapping paper everywhere, kids running around with new toys, that familiar chaos of too many people in too small a space. I was helping Melanie set up her new art supplies when Paige appeared with a perfectly wrapped box. "I got something special for my favorite niece," she said, settling down next to us with that smile she used when she was up to something. Melanie tore off the paper to reveal an ancestry DNA kit. The box promised to unlock family secrets, trace our heritage, connect us with distant relatives. Innocent enough on the surface. "How cool," Melanie said, examining the kit. "Can we do it today? We'll need to wait a few weeks," I said, reading the instructions. "It takes time to process." Paige's smile got wider. "I thought it would be fun to learn our family history. You never know what interesting discoveries you might make about where we really come from." The way she emphasized "really" should have been my first warning. But it was Christmas. Melanie was excited, and I was too focused on enjoying the holiday to read between the lines. She said it would be fun to learn our family history. Later that evening, after Melanie had gone to bed, I found Paige, Mom, and Dad having a very different conversation in the kitchen. They stopped talking when I walked in, but the silence was loaded with something I couldn't quite identify. "Everything okay?" I asked, grabbing a beer from the fridge. "We're just worried about you, honey," Mom said, in that tone she used when she was about to say something I wouldn't like. "About your marriage." "My marriage is fine." Paige exchanged a look with our parents. "Hunter, we've noticed some things about Kate, the way she's been acting lately." "What kind of things?" "She's been distant at family gatherings," Dad said. "Seems distracted, always checking her phone. And she's been working a lot of late nights recently," Paige added. "That's usually a red flag." I stared at them, trying to process what I was hearing. "You think Kate is cheating on me?" "We're not saying that," Mom said quickly. "We're just saying it might be worth paying attention to." "Look, I know this is hard to hear," Paige said, putting on her most concerned sister voice. "But sometimes the person closest to the situation is the last one to see what's really happening. We love you, and we don't want you to get hurt." The conversation felt orchestrated, like they'd planned exactly what each person would say. Paige was leading the charge, but Mom and Dad were backing her up with just enough concern to make it seem legitimate. She convinced everyone Kate was hiding something. The DNA kit sat on our kitchen counter for 3 weeks while we waited for Melanie to get over a cold. Every time I walked past it, I felt this nagging sense that I was missing something important. But Paige made sure I didn't have time to think too clearly about it. She started calling every few days with updates about the processing timeline and helpful reminders about how exciting the results would be. Each conversation somehow circled back to Kate's behavior and whether I'd noticed anything unusual lately. "You know, when someone's hiding something, they usually get defensive about things that shouldn't matter," she said during one of these calls. "Like if Kate gets upset about the DNA test, that might tell you something." "Kate's not upset about anything. She thinks it's a fun project for Melanie. I'm just saying innocent people don't usually have strong reactions to innocent activities. If she starts making excuses about why you shouldn't do it, you might want to ask yourself why." The conversation always ended the same way. Paige would remind me how much the family loved me, and how they just wanted to protect me from getting hurt. She had this way of making her suspicions sound like caring concern. She made it sound like I was hiding something by protecting Kate. Meanwhile, family dinners became exercises in psychological warfare. Kate would arrive to find subtle changes in the seating arrangement that left her isolated at one end of the table. Conversations would flow around her like she wasn't there, filled with inside jokes and references to events she hadn't been invited to. Mom would ask pointed questions about her work schedule. Dad would make comments about how marriage required complete honesty to survive. Paige would share stories about friends whose marriages had been destroyed by secrets and lies. Kate handled it with more grace than I would have. She'd smile politely, answer their questions, and try to participate in conversations that were clearly designed to exclude her. But I could see the stress building in the tightness around her eyes, the way she started finding excuses to leave early. "Your family doesn't like me very much lately," she told me one evening after a particularly awkward dinner. "They're just going through a weird phase," I said, not knowing how to explain something I didn't fully understand myself. "It feels like they're trying to get me to confess to something I didn't do." She was right. But I didn't know what to do about it. Every time I tried to defend Kate or push back against their suspicions, I got lectures about being naive and refusing to see the obvious signs. They turned family gatherings into interrogation sessions. The irony is that while all this family drama was playing out, the real bombshell was developing in Paige's own house. Her 16-year-old son, Scott, had been assigned a genetics project for his advanced biology class, and he'd become fascinated by the whole concept of DNA testing and inheritance patterns. "Aunt Paige got Melanie one of those DNA kits for Christmas," he mentioned during a family dinner in February. "That was pretty cool. I've been thinking about getting one myself for this school project I'm working on." Paige's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. "What kind of project?" "We're studying genetic inheritance and family trees. Mr. Rodriguez said using real DNA data would make our presentations more interesting. I was thinking about comparing my results with Dad's to show how traits get passed down." The color drained from Paige's face, but she recovered quickly. "That sounds like an expensive school project. Maybe you should just use theoretical examples instead." "Actually, they're not that expensive, and it would make my project stand out from everyone else's." Scott said he wanted to do his own DNA test for school. Scott was determined to get that DNA kit, and Paige found herself in an impossible position. The more she tried to discourage him, the more suspicious she looked. When she suggested he focus on other aspects of genetics. For his project, he pointed out that his teacher had specifically encouraged students to use real data if possible. "Come on, Mom," he said over dinner one evening in March. "It's for my education, and it'll be cool to see how much DNA I share with Dad and Qley." Sean looked up from his plate, interested. "That does sound pretty fascinating. I'd be curious to see the results, too." "It's just so expensive," Paige said weakly. "And those companies aren't always accurate." "I can pay for it with my birthday money," Scott replied. "And Ancestry DNA is the same company cousin Melanie used. Her results were really detailed." Paige was trapped. Any parent who tried to prevent their child from doing a school project about genetics would look either controlling or like they were hiding something. She couldn't explain why the idea terrified her without revealing exactly what she was afraid the test might discover. Paige couldn't stop him without looking suspicious. 3 weeks later, Scott's results came back. He was excited to present his findings to his biology class, so he'd logged into his account the moment he got the email notification. What he found there didn't make immediate sense to him, but he was smart enough to understand the implications once he thought about it. The DNA match percentages were all wrong. According to the results, he shared significant genetic material with people on his mother's side of the family, but almost nothing with anyone connected to his father. When he compared his genetic markers to Sean's profile, they showed the relationship you'd expect between a stepfather and stepson, not a biological father and son. Scott spent an hour on genetics websites and discussion forums, trying to understand if there could be some mistake. But the science was clear, and he was too intelligent to deny what the data was telling him. He called the genetic counseling service that Ancestry DNA recommended for situations like this. The counselor was gentle, but direct, based on the results. Sean was not Scott's biological father. The genetic evidence was conclusive. That evening, Scott sat his parents down in the living room with his laptop open to the results page. His voice was quiet but steady as he explained what he'd discovered. "Mom, I need to ask you something about my DNA results, because according to this, Dad isn't my biological father." Scott wasn't Sean's biological son. The silence that followed was devastating. Sean stared at the laptop screen, like he was trying to make the numbers change through sheer willpower. Scott looked between his parents, waiting for some explanation that would make sense of everything. Paige's first instinct was damage control. "There must be some mistake," she said quickly. "These companies make errors all the time. The samples could have gotten mixed up, or I already checked with their genetic counselor," Scott said. "She explained how the testing works. There's no mistake, Mom." Sean's voice was very quiet when he finally spoke. "Paige is there. Something you need to tell me." That's when the perfect family facade finally crumbled. Paige broke down, completely sobbing about how sorry she was, how it was a mistake that happened years ago, how she never meant for anyone to get hurt. But even in her breakdown, even while confessing to a decade-long affair, her primary concern wasn't the pain she'd caused. It was managing the situation to minimize the damage to herself. She started playing the victim immediately. While Paige was busy managing her family crisis and trying to convince everyone that her affair was just a mistake, I was doing what I do best, gathering facts. The DNA revelation had opened a door that couldn't be closed, and I wanted to understand exactly what we were dealing with before anyone could start rewriting history. I started with the obvious place, Paige's credit card statements. Sean had mentioned during one of his angry phone calls that he'd discovered years of unexplained charges on their joint accounts. Hotel rooms booked during times when she claimed to be visiting friends. Restaurant bills for two at places she'd never mentioned going to. Spa treatments and weekend getaways that somehow never made it into her social media posts. The pattern went back 10 years. Every few weeks there would be charges that didn't match up with her public story. The amounts were always carefully kept small enough to avoid suspicion. But when you added them up over a decade, they told the story of a systematic double life. I spent 3 days creating a spreadsheet that cross-referenced dates, locations, and amounts. The evidence was overwhelming. Paige had been conducting an affair with the same person for Scott's entire life. 10 years of affair evidence, hidden in plain sight. But the financial evidence was just the beginning. While I was building my timeline, I remembered something our grandfather had told me about the family trust. The morality clause wasn't just about criminal behavior. It specifically mentioned adultery as grounds for forfeiture. I dug out my copy of the trust documents and read through them carefully. The language was clear and unambiguous. Any beneficiary who committed adultery would immediately lose all rights to the inheritance. The money would go to charity instead, with no possibility of appeal or reinstatement. I called the lawyer who'd helped set up the trust to confirm my understanding. He was very clear about the implications. "If you can prove sustained adultery with documentation," he said, "the clause is automatically triggered. Your sister would lose access to her entire inheritance, and the funds would be distributed according to the alternate provisions in the trust. The trust could be revoked for moral violations." While I was building my legal case, Paige was building her public defense. Her social media had shifted from happy family posts to carefully crafted statements about going through a difficult time and asking for privacy and understanding from friends and family. But I knew something she'd forgotten. The internet never forgets anything. I spent an evening screenshotting years of her posts, particularly the ones from dates that corresponded to hotel charges on her credit cards. Photos of her girls' weekend that happened the same day she'd booked a room at a downtown hotel. Anniversary dinner posts with Sean that coincided with romantic restaurant bills for 2 at different establishments. Then I found her text messages. Sean had forwarded them to me in a moment of rage, wanting someone else to see the evidence of how thoroughly he'd been deceived. Message after message showing Paige coordinating meetups, making excuses to leave the house, planning cover stories for her absences. The most damning were the messages where she complained about Sean and talked about her plans for the future. She'd been stringing along both her husband and her affair partner for years, telling each of them what they wanted to hear while committing to neither. Her own messages proved years of calculated deception. I knew Paige well enough to predict her next move. When cornered, she always escalated. She would try to use Scott and Qley as leverage, claiming that any consequences for her behavior would hurt the children. She'd paint herself as a victim of circumstances beyond her control and try to rally family support for her position. So I made an appointment with a family law attorney to understand exactly what a custody battle would look like. I wanted to be prepared for every argument she might make and every manipulation she might try. The lawyer was direct about the realities. Adultery doesn't automatically determine custody, she said, but it's certainly relevant to questions of character and stability. If there's evidence of deception, poor judgment, or putting personal desires ahead of children's welfare, that all matters to the court. She would use the kids as weapons like always. The smart move was coordination, not confrontation. Sean was devastated and furious, but he was also methodical when it came to protecting his interests. We met with his attorney to discuss strategy and evidence sharing. The goal wasn't immediate revenge. It was building an airtight case that would hold up in family court. The key is letting Paige make her own mistakes, his lawyer explained. She's going to escalate her victim narrative and probably say things that hurt her credibility. We document everything and stay patient. Sean had been recording his conversations with Paige since the DNA results came out. Every phone call where she tried to minimize her affair, every time she blamed circumstances or other people for her choices, every moment where she put her own interests ahead of the children's stability. The recordings showed a pattern of manipulation and self-serving behavior that would be devastating in a custody hearing. Paige kept digging herself deeper with every conversation, and we were documenting all of it. We decided to let Paige dig herself deeper. Meanwhile, Paige was doing exactly what I'd predicted. She was turning our parents into her personal army. The family group chat had become a constant stream of messages about how everyone needed to rally around Paige during her difficult time. Mom called me twice a week with guilt trips about family loyalty and forgiveness. She made a mistake, Hunter, but she's still your sister. This is when family is supposed to stick together. A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk at the store, I replied. A decade-long affair while lying to your husband and kids isn't a mistake. It's a choice she made every day for 10 years. You're being vindictive. This isn't like you. Dad took a different approach, focusing on the children. Whatever Paige did, Scott and Qley don't deserve to lose their mother. You're contributing to breaking up this family. The irony was breathtaking. I was being blamed for the consequences of Paige's actions, just like when we were kids. She could destroy her marriage with years of lies and betrayal, but somehow I was the villain for not helping her avoid accountability. They were asking me to enable her manipulation the same way they always had. Pretend her choices didn't matter, minimize the harm she'd caused, and help her rebuild her image without actually addressing the underlying problems. She turned our parents into her personal army. As the custody hearing date approached, I found myself in a strange emotional space. Part of me felt satisfied that justice was finally coming for someone who'd spent our entire childhood getting away with everything. But another part of me was genuinely sad about the family destruction that was about to happen. Scott and Qley were innocent in all this. They were about to watch their family implode in front of a judge, and there was nothing I could do to protect them from that pain. Paige had made choices that would hurt everyone around her, but the kids would pay the biggest price. I'd spent weeks gathering evidence and building legal strategies, but sitting in the courthouse parking lot the morning of the hearing, I realized that some victories feel more like tragedies. Even when justice is served, real people get hurt. But Paige had built this situation through years of lies and selfishness. The pain that was about to be revealed had always existed. It was just hidden behind her perfect social media posts and manipulative family dynamics. Everything would be exposed in front of a judge. The family courthouse was smaller than I'd expected, but the weight of what was about to happen filled every inch of space. Paige sat at the defendant's table with her attorney looking polished and composed in the way she'd perfected over years of managing her image. She'd chosen a conservative dress that suggested both professionalism and vulnerability, the perfect costume for a woman who was about to claim that everyone else was responsible for her problems. The custody evaluator called the hearing to order, and Paige's lawyer wasted no time launching into their prepared narrative. According to their opening statement, Paige was the victim of a vindictive ex-husband who was using an old indiscretion to destroy her relationship with her children. She was a devoted mother who'd made one mistake years ago and deserved forgiveness, not punishment. When Paige took the stand to testify on her own behalf, she delivered exactly the performance I'd expected. Tears at strategic moments, self-deprecating admissions of poor judgment, and repeated emphasis on how much she loved Scott and Qley. But then she made the crucial error her lawyer should have prevented. When asked about the DNA discovery, she started blaming everyone else for the situation. "This whole thing started because my brother was suspicious about his own wife," she said, her voice taking on an edge of resentment. "He got obsessed with DNA testing and dragged our whole family into it. If he hadn't been so paranoid about Kate, none of this would have come out." She testified that everyone was conspiring against her. Sean's attorney let her dig that hole for another 10 minutes before beginning cross-examination. The strategy was brilliant. Let Paige establish her victim narrative first, then systematically dismantle it with evidence. The financial records came out first. Hotel receipts dating back to 2014. Restaurant charges for 2 people at establishments Paige had never mentioned visiting. Spa treatments and weekend getaways that coincided perfectly with times she'd told Sean she was visiting her college roommate or attending work conferences. "Can you explain this charge for a hotel room in downtown on March 15th of last year?" the attorney asked, holding up a credit card statement. "According to your social media, you posted photos of a family movie night at home that same evening." Paige's composure started cracking. "I don't remember every hotel charge. Sometimes work requires overnight stays that I don't think to mention. Your employment records show you took a personal day on March 15th. There was no work requirement for you to be downtown that night." The cross-examination continued for an hour, with Paige's explanations getting weaker and more contradictory with each piece of evidence. The text messages were particularly devastating. Years of communication showing her coordinating affair meetings, complaining about Sean to her lover, and planning cover stories for her absences. 10 years of receipts proved deliberate deception. But the nuclear weapon was still waiting to be deployed. When Sean's attorney introduced the family trust documents, I watched Paige's face go pale. She'd completely forgotten about the morality clause in her focus on the custody battle. The lawyer walked the judge through the trust provisions methodically. $2 million, divided equally between the grandchildren's parents, contingent on maintaining moral behavior standards. Adultery specifically listed as grounds for immediate forfeiture. Your Honor, the evidence shows that Mrs. Coleman has been engaged in sustained adultery for over 10 years. Under the clear terms of the trust established by her grandparents, she has forfeited all rights to inheritance. The funds will be distributed to charity, as specified in the alternate provisions. I testified about my investigation, presenting the timeline I'd built, and explaining how the DNA test had uncovered the truth about Scott's paternity. The judge reviewed the genetic evidence, the financial records, and the communication history with careful attention. "The morality clause is unambiguous," she said finally. "The evidence shows sustained deception and adultery over a period of years. The inheritance rights are forfeited, effective immediately." The judge ruled the trust funds were forfeited. The custody decision came after additional testimony from Scott's school counselor and a social worker who'd interviewed both children. The judge's reasoning was clinical and thorough. Paige had demonstrated poor judgment, deceptive behavior, and a pattern of putting her personal desires ahead of family stability. Primary custody was awarded to Sean. Paige would have supervised visitation twice a month, with the possibility of expanded access after completing counseling and demonstrating sustained behavioral changes. The court recognizes that children benefit from relationships with both parents, the judge said. But the evidence shows that Mrs. Coleman's choices have created an unstable environment. The children's welfare requires structure and honesty, which Mr. Coleman is better positioned to provide. As the gavel came down, I looked across the courtroom at my sister. The golden child who'd spent our entire childhood getting away with everything had finally faced real consequences. She'd lost her children, her inheritance, and her carefully constructed, perfect life. She lost her children and her inheritance in one hearing. The aftermath of the custody hearing was swift and brutal. Word travels fast in our family, and by the time I got home that evening, my phone was buzzing with messages from relatives who'd heard about the court decision. The reactions ranged from shock to disappointment to quiet satisfaction from people who'd suspected something was wrong for years. Mom called me that night, and for the first time in my adult life, she couldn't find a way to defend Paige's behavior. "I don't understand how she could lie to us for so long," she said, her voice hollow with disbelief. "All those family dinners, where she sat there talking about trust and honesty while she was living this double life." Dad was even more direct when I saw him at Grandpa Walter's house the following weekend. "Your sister made her choices," he said simply. "We can't keep making excuses for someone who shows that kind of disregard for her own family." The Golden Child Protection Program had finally been canceled. After 35 years of enabling and excuse-making, our parents had run out of ways to rationalize Paige's behavior. The evidence had been too overwhelming, the deception too systematic, the consequences too severe. Even Mom and Dad couldn't defend her anymore. 6 months later, the dust had settled into a new normal that nobody could have predicted. Scott and Qley were thriving in Sean's custody, with a stability and honesty they'd never experienced while Paige was running the household. The $2 million from the trust had been distributed to children's charities exactly as our grandparents had intended if moral standards weren't maintained. Kate and I had grown closer through the whole ordeal. She'd been vindicated completely when the truth came out, and our family had finally learned to appreciate what I'd known all along. She was exactly who she appeared to be, with no hidden agendas or secret lives. The irony of the whole situation wasn't lost on any of us. Paige had spent Christmas morning trying to destroy my marriage with a DNA test, convinced that she was the moral authority who would expose Kate's imaginary infidelity. Instead, She'd triggered a chain of events that exposed her own very real, decade-long betrayal. Her weapon of choice had become the instrument of her own destruction. Karma had used the same tool she'd tried to use against me, but with devastating precision against the right target. Sometimes karma just needs the right DNA test,